The evolution of your marketing will be the catalyst for the evolution of your business, and the evolution of your business will provide you with the freedom to focus on the evolution of your life. This is Evolved Marketing with Andrei and Brian. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Evolved Marketing Podcast. My name is Brian Brewer, along with my co-host, as always, Andrei Yermejev, and today we have a special guest. Now, I'm gonna tell you the truth here. I'm a little nervous about today's special guest because when it comes to podcasting, today's guest has produced, filmed, shot, recorded, whatever you want to call it, over 800 episodes. He's also a podcast consultant, and he has even founded a really cool platform called Guestio, which helps people have shows, whether it be a podcast or a YouTube channel, bring guests on. It kind of acts like a portal to allow you to book guests if you have the budget, of course. So I'm really excited for today's show. His specialty is networking. He believes that if you can connect with the best, you can become the best. And his podcast has recently gone under a rebrand. It is now called Travis Makes Friends. So without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome to the show, Travis Chappell. Thanks for joining us here today.
Ryan, Andrei, what's up, guys? How's everything going?
Everything's great. We're super excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked to be here. Let's do it.
Awesome. Awesome. So when I was reading your website and I saw that you used to be a door-to-door salesman. Can you take us through that journey, how everything started and how you jumped from being a salesperson to creating your own podcast?
Yeah, so I grew up largely religious, kind of cult-like. Just to give you some context, I grew up at this church. It was Independent Fundamental Baptist, and it was like a 40-acre campus. And on the same campus of the church, there was a school, K through 12 school, and college publication ministry. There's a bunch of different things. And I went to the church from the time that I was 3 till the time that I was 21. And then I went to the school on the church campus from kindergarten all the way through senior year of high school, and then graduated high school and then went to college on the same campus. So quite literally my entire school experience was at this one campus, which was also my church. And so the college was purely ministerial college. There's no quote unquote secular degrees. So I ended up getting a double major in Bible and church ministries. When you graduate with a degree like that, you're going into ministry. But the problem was I did an internship my junior year. And at the same time, I was doing door-to-door sales in college just to like make extra money, you know? And I found myself enjoying my job way more than I was enjoying the internship, which was the thing that I was supposed to be doing for the rest of my life. And I got down to the point where I was like, man, I don't think I want to be doing this. I did a bunch of job interviews with pastors across the country that were looking for, associate pastors, youth pastors, stuff like that, which is what I wanted to do. And it was just like, oh my gosh, man, these job interviews, like none of them are exciting to me. None of them are something that I really want to do. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. And it also helps the thing I'm doing now, like at 19 or 20 years old, I was already making more than double what I was going to be making when I started in whatever role that I was going to be pursuing in the ministry. So I was just at this kind of weird place where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but I don't think it's going to be that. And it was like really taboo in that culture to not do that thing. And so the only thing I could do was door-to-door sales when I decided I wasn't going to be in ministry anymore, because I don't really have any other skills. My degree was quite literally useless, because it was not only was it a Bible degree, which is already pretty useless, it was an unaccredited Bible degree. So, you don't go get a job on Wall Street after you graduate from a unaccredited Bible college. So I didn't really know what to do. The only thing I knew how to do was door to door, and I happened to be pretty good at it, which was good. So I started doing door to door sales like full time. I was 100% commission door to door sales rep. And like I said, I was pretty good at it. I always was hungry, ambitious. I wanted to make money. I was entrepreneurial from the time that I was a little kid. So the door-to-door sales was something that I could really grasp because it felt way more entrepreneurial to me than getting a job or something like that. It was just like I knew if I got a lot of sales jobs, if you have like salaries and all that kind of stuff, it's like the people who are the bottom performers, they'll make whatever 70K a year. And the people who are the top performers, they'll make like 150 a year. There's still a discrepancy between those two people, but it's it's not as big. Whereas in 100% commission door to door, it's like, if you're not good, you're making 18 grand. And if you're good, you can make 150, 250, 300 grand, whatever it is, depending on the product you're selling. So I really liked that. And I just kept doing door to door, man. I busted my tail, started recruiting people, started training those people, started building my own team, managing people. And eventually what happened was, it was kind of counterintuitive. It was like, I had this goal of hitting 6 figures. And so the first year that I was a full-time door-to-door guy, I hit 6 figures. And then at the same time, it was a realization that I was already bumping up against a ceiling where I was. And as a 21, 22-year-old, at the time, I was just like, I don't know much about my career, but I feel like this is a problem to be like 22 and already feel like, I obviously could have worked more. That was the thing. I was working probably like 20, 25 hours a week and still pulled 6 figures, but I would only work during like optimal knocking times. So I knew that I could go like double my hours, but I knew if I double my hours, I would not double my pay, because your pitches get incrementally worse the longer you do them. And then also people aren't home as often during the other times of the day. So it's just, you put in more hours, you might be able to bump up your pay 20, 30%, but that's about it. And that was kind of scary to me. So I started looking at everything, man. I was looking at, at this time was kind of like that, rock bottom moment. I say rock bottom. It's not like I was, in a back alley selling crack and stuff like that. But it was a rock bottom moment for me, because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was like 22, 23 years old. I had a mortgage, we bought a house. I was married. I married my high school sweetheart when I was 21. So I was married with a mortgage. I had bills, I had responsibilities. I was an adult, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I knew the thing I had a degree in, I didn't want to do. So the thing I'm qualified to do, I don't want to do that. And the thing that I'm good at, I also don't want to do that, because I got to the end of that year, I was like, I don't want to be doing door to door like this forever. And I already feel like I'm bumping up against the ceiling. And the only way to make more money doing this is like to start owning the companies. And I just didn't want to do that. So now I was just like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And this is the first time in my life that I really dove into personal development for the first time, because I was desperate to find a path forward. And I had no idea what that path was going to be. So I started, audiobooks and started reading for the first time in my life.
When you started that personal development journey, I'm curious, do you remember where you started, who you started with, what author, what speaker, which motivator that kind of caught your attention first?
Yeah, it was almost like a Trojan horse in the network marketing industry, because a buddy of mine got me into some MLM. And I did probably like 6 of those types of companies while I was doing door to door, like trying to pull something out on the side. And then they get you into personal development like that. That's actually a really positive thing about the network marketing industry to me, is they get you in the door in personal development and things like that. So I started listening to like Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, people like that. And then that led me into like more modern. Someone recommended Gary Vee to me. It's the first time I started listening to Gary Vee. And then because I was in sales, somebody recommended Grant Cardone to me. Started listening to some of Grant Cardone stuff. And then that brought me into the podcast world. So I was like kind of watching these people on social, and I think maybe YouTube or something. And then somebody introduced me to podcasts, or maybe it was like Cardone or Gary Vee or something, was like, check out my podcast. So I started listening to their podcasts, and then I started discovering other podcasts. So I started listening to, Tim Ferriss, Bigger Pockets podcast, Jordan Harbinger show. Back then it was called something different, but now it's Jordan Harbinger show. And then somebody turned me on to John Lee Dumas and Entrepreneur on Fire. And he has his show, which is really successful, but he also teaches podcasting. And so on one of the calls to action on one of his shows, he was like, hey, if you ever thought about starting your own podcast, go take my free podcast course. And I was like, yeah, all right, I'll do that. And I took the course and was like, this seems like it'd be fun. So I decided to start a podcast. And that was like September, October of 2016. And I did not start the show until August of 2017. So it took me almost a full year from the time that I decided that I was going to do it to actually get the show launched. But it eventually happened. So I decided I was going to do it, hired a coach, jumped in a mastermind, spent a ton of money on stuff like courses and coaching, masterminds, just trying to learn and soak in as much as I possibly could. Really what it was is like, I didn't know much of the time, but I knew that if I found the people who had done the thing that I wanted to do, or who had the results that I wanted to have, and I got around them, I could learn exactly how to reverse engineer their success. And I started noticing that all the people that I was following like had done something like that. They had a coach, or they hired this person, or they had a mentorship, or they were in a mastermind, or they bought a course or something. They were all actively investing into making themselves a better version of themselves. And I was like, oh, that's a clue. You know what I mean? Like I'm a detective out here. That, you know, and that was a clue to me. And so I started doing that, and it led me into that entire world. So yeah, that was the journey away from ministry to door all the way through into finally starting my podcast.
And then when you started your podcast, you say you started posting like 2017, right?
Yep.
And then how were your first episodes? You know, how did you feel? You know, were you confident that you were gonna be okay with the guests, or what were you thinking when you first started?
Yeah, they were terrible. My first episodes, they were so bad. I remember trying to edit my first episode. It took me like 2 hours, like 10-minute episode. When I was done with it, I was like, yeah, I need to hire somebody to do this. So that was like the nice thing about like the fact that, you know, one thing that I'm pretty ardent about, especially for young people, is working on perfecting a skill. Is like get good at something, find something to get good at. And at that point in my life, luckily, I was pretty good at selling still. So when I was starting my podcast, I was also still doing door to door on the side, and it was 100% commission. So I could work when I wanted to, not work when I didn't want to. And that was really helpful because, you know, the first mastermind I joined, took me a long time to make the decision to join. It was like $6,500, and it was for 3 days, and it was in Puerto Rico, and I had to fly to Puerto Rico. It was like an $8,000 weekend. And keep in mind, up to this point, the most I'd ever invested in myself was like an audiobook, you know, for like $25. So the jump from that to $8,000 was like, people in my life were like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, you could spend that money on a lot of different things, or you could invest that into your business. You could, like, if you're starting that, that's fine, but like, do it this way. Why are you, you know, doing this for this weekend? That doesn't make any sense. Blah, 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 blah. But anyway, when I spent that money that week, I came back and I knocked doors for like 2 weeks, made 15 grand selling stuff door to door, and paid that stuff off. So it was valuable to have that skill set to fall back on because I was confident that even if I invested the money, I knew that I could go get it back somehow if I was focused on it. So yeah, I just started investing like crazy, and jumped into these mastermind groups and learned as much as I possibly could. Started
That's a lot of that's a lot of the pressures that a lot of people feel when they're first getting started and they've never done anything like this before, where they've never invested in themselves. You know, they're worried about what their family's going to say. They worry about the outsiders, you know, calling this a scam because you're buying a course. What did you tell yourself, or how did you have confidence in yourself to go forth and invest and ignore the outside pressures that were coming in?
It was pretty simple for me, man. And that was this piece of advice that I get to people all the time: is never take advice from people you're not willing to trade places with. And by the way, when I say that, I don't mean like trade places with them on every aspect of their life. I'm saying for the thing that you're trying to learn, if you would trade places with that person, then you should probably listen to their advice about how to achieve that thing more than the advice of other people who have no idea how to achieve that thing. Right. So like the people in my life that were telling me it was a bad idea was like, well, this is exactly what John Lee Dumas did. You know what I mean? Like, he bought a coach, like hired a coach, and he joined a mastermind like right off the bat. And he's invested like 9 grand in these things when he first started. And so I was looking at that, and that was what I did. And the mastermind was at his house in Puerto Rico, getting to know him more. And so I was like, well, and then when you go there, you do it for the first time, you meet the other people that are in the room, and the other people in the room are all doing the same thing, and they're all accomplishing the same things that you want to accomplish. And it's like, well, you know, I can appreciate and respect the people in my life who love me enough to pull me aside and say, hey, I don't know if this is the right thing for you, or you might be getting scammed, or blah, blah, blah. Like, you got to respect people and say, well, thank you, you know, for caring enough about me to be willing to like give me some uncomfortable truth from the way that you see it. But I don't see it that way, you know, because like nobody in my life was a successful podcaster. Nobody in my life really even knew what a podcast was at the time. And I was just like, look, if I'm going to do it this way, then I can't listen to the advice of people who've never done what I want to do. I got to go listen to the advice of the people who have done what I want to do and have done it at the really, really, really high level. So that one was like pretty simple for me, you know, like it's never fun, but it was pretty simple for me just to be like, yeah, well, this seems like the blueprint. And in my mind, you know, the reason most people aren't confident enough to invest themselves is because they're not confident they can go get the money back. And so that was like the one thing that I was like pretty sure about at the time. It was like, I'm pretty confident in my sales ability enough to where I know if I invest $8,000 in this, I know if I invest 5,000 in a website and graphics and logos and whatever else for my show and all these other things, I know that I can go make that money back if I just bust my tail for a couple of weeks and go sell some stuff. So the confidence was helpful, but also, yeah, it was pretty simple and straightforward for me at the time. It was just like, yeah, it sucks, but also like, you haven't done what I want to do. So why would I listen to you?
Yeah. And I'm sure you got a lot of knowledge going to that event and a lot of networking. I'm sure you met a lot of people that probably made an impact in your life as well. So at what point did you see your podcast like blowing up? Like, well, okay, this is something that is gonna work, because in the beginning you don't know it's gonna work, like what
in the beginning
the
it did not work.
Okay.
that was the bummer part. I got into podcasting probably like 2 years, maybe 3 years too late and I don't mean too late in terms of life. Obviously, it's still, you can start a podcast today and have it still do well. I'm saying in terms of like the way that the old school people were building podcasts at the time stopped working by the time I was starting my podcast. But since it was so new, the changes that were being made in Apple and all the algorithms and everything, nobody knew what to tell me. So that made it really frustrating because now I've invested like $25,000 at this point, and I launch my show and I do everything that everybody told me to do. And I hit the top charts, like top 200 all of business charts. And when I see that, I'm like, I made it, because this is what everybody told me, like if you get on the top charts and if you get in, like new and noteworthy was the biggest thing. So if you get into the new and noteworthy section on Apple, that'll make you discoverable for a bunch of people. You'll start taking off, but you got to get new and noteworthy at the beginning. It's like, okay, cool. I put in all the work to do that, but turns out for like 2 years, the new and noteworthy section of iTunes was frozen. They didn't update it. There were shows in the new and noteworthy section that had not only like not started recently, they were done releasing episodes. They had been done for like a year and a half. It was a dead show sitting in new and noteworthy. It didn't make any sense, but they weren't updating it. And so when I launched my show, I was like, well, new noteworthy is not an option, but now I have to do more work because I got to hit the top charts, which is more difficult than new and noteworthy. I did it. I hit the top charts, and then like almost nothing happened to my download numbers. And I was like, oh no, like, what have I done? And so it was at that moment where it was just like the only thing that kept me in the game was the fact that I committed to be in the game. So before I launched my show, I was like, I'm going to give this 2 years. 2 years, 3 episodes a week. I'm not missing. I will do 2 years of 3 episodes a week, no matter what is happening in my life. And that was what I committed to. So that's the only thing that kept me in the game, because it was discouraging at the time. And then it was like, well, if I'm going to keep putting in this much work into this thing, I should probably figure out another way to make it happen. And so that was eventually what I ended up starting to do. And it wasn't until 2, maybe 3 years later until like my show started getting into thousands of downloads per episode. And then, now it gets tens of thousands. But at the time, yeah, dude, it was like 200, 300 downloads an episode. I got up to like, when I released my Grant Cardone episode, it got up to like 600, and I was like, woo, but it was just like everything that I thought was going to move the needle tremendously wasn't moving the needle tremendously. They were all like little boosts, little tiny boosts. It was like, oh, Grant Cardone, I made it. I'm going to go viral. You know what I mean? And then you release the episode. I flew out to Miami, did the episode in person in his studio, built a great connection with him. He told me it's one of the best interviews he'd ever done. His team, we cut up clips, and this was at the time when nobody was doing clips. We cut up clips for his team to post on social, and they did. They posted like 5 Instagram clips on social. And again, this whole time I'm thinking like, this is the ticket. If I do this, I win. And like I did all of it, and none of it worked. And so it was extremely frustrating during that time period. And I definitely thought about quitting like probably around the 12 to 18 month mark, because that was when I was in the shit. Sorry if I don't.
Yeah, those doubts start creeping in when you think you did the thing that you need to do and it doesn't work out.
And
now,
I'm
obviously
$30,000 in debt because of it,
Right. Yeah. Now, obviously consistency is the formula. I mean, we talk a lot about consistency on this podcast. I think Andrei has even mentioned that consistency is probably his superpower that sets him apart from a majority of the affiliate marketers in the space. But you mentioned that you were 2 to 3 years too late to grow your podcast the old way. And then you came in 2017, but you've obviously figured out the formula to grow your podcast. So beyond consistency and obviously trying to improve your delivery and get better guests, What works now for growing a podcast?
The best way to grow your podcast is on other podcasts. To me, like that's the bottom line for any platform you're trying to grow. If you want to grow more on Instagram, then you're going to need to invest more into Instagram. If you want to grow more, you want to grow your email list, do more list buys and list leases and grow your email list that way. You know what I mean? Like you want to grow your Facebook audience, advertise on Facebook. It's just, if you want to do something on a platform, then you need to grow within that platform. But podcasting is unique in the fact that it does not exist within the broader ecosystem of all the other platforms, meaning that, YouTube and Instagram are very similar. If you find somebody's Instagram reel and it was funny or whatever, and they have their YouTube link in their bio, you go over there and you subscribe, and it's like the consumption habits are very similar on a lot of these other platforms. Podcasting is like an island; it exists over here by itself, so it even is more exaggerated than everything else because there's 2 billion plus social media users. There's still less than 500 million podcast listeners. So if you're advertising on all these other platforms to go to your podcast, it's like, well, you even know that person even listens to podcasts. You know what I mean? Like how many podcasts do you consume where you've never actually listened to the podcast? You've only ever just seen their 2-minute clips on Instagram. Like you're familiar with the show, but you've never actually listened to it. So if you want to grow your actual podcast audience numbers, you need to find people who listen to podcasts first and foremost. And the easiest and best way to find them is while they're listening to another podcast. So I know it sounds super rudimentary, but it is just the way that it goes. And it's even more exaggerated in the podcasting world. And so, the best way to do it is doing exactly what we're doing right now, be a guest on other podcasts within your similar niche that has audience members that you think would be good for your audience. You can buy ads on other podcasts through like ad marketplaces like AdvertiseCast or Gumball .fm. You can buy ads on other people's podcasts, or you can buy like platform ads. Like there's several media players that are out there besides Spotify and Apple. There's a lot of like smaller ones that you can go to those platforms. You can buy ads on those platforms. So when people are on there listening to their podcasts, they see a banner ad for your show and they'll click and listen. So the bottom line is like once you've done exactly what you already clarified, Brian, when it's like, look, I know that my podcast content is good. Like we're putting a lot of effort into making it really good. We've already released 184 episodes on the show. We've been consistent. We have a really good guest lineup. We're releasing really good stuff. It's good quality. I know if people in my ideal audience listen to the show, they would get tremendous value from it. Great. That's cool. That's the baseline. Like that's like, to me, that's like if you imagine a bucket and water is traffic, right? Like the bucket is the problem for most people because the bucket has too many holes in it. They don't release consistently. They don't have good guests. They don't have interesting content. They don't edit it well. That, the sound is all over the place. It's inconsistent. It's a bad listener experience, whatever. Like there's a bunch of holes in the bucket. First, you got to patch up the holes in the bucket. Then you can turn the faucet on. You know what I mean? And then once you turn the faucet on, then, the bucket actually can retain the traffic that you're sending to it. And so once you have those things buttoned up, like the real answer to the question is spend money. Like you're just going to have to spend money on acquiring listeners for your show. That's like the biggest thing that most people can't wrap their minds around because most people don't make money on their show. So it's like, well, I'm telling you to spend more money on your show and you've never made money on your show. And it's like, oh, well, I don't know if I want to do that. You know what I mean? So it prevents a lot of people from doing it. And it's a tricky business to get into because you can waste a lot of money because podcast ad attribution is not very good. That's why you only hear the massive brands advertising on podcasts because they're doing it more for like brand recognition and real estate in your brain. You know what I mean? They're not doing it for like direct response and clicks. That's why you never hear any direct response companies or coaching companies or anything advertise on podcasts unless it's their own podcast that they're self-sponsoring because like there's not a great way to track this attribution stuff.
Yeah. Well, now that we're talking about like money, like when do you see the money coming? You get me? You start this podcast and then what are ways for you to get an income from it? Like what are the ways to monetize it?
The first thing that I ever did was I started my own mastermind. I started realizing that I was connecting with cool people on my show and we were building decent relationships. And there's a lot of people that wanted to have access to those people, not even necessarily to me. I was more like the conduit, you know what I mean? So I started a mastermind group. That was my first way I monetized my show. So I did that with like 200 downloads an episode, 250 downloads an episode. I started a mastermind group. Like I think I sold like 6 people into it. And I probably ended up losing money on the whole thing. But it was my first ever, like it was so important to me because it was the first time I ever made money online. And like that was like I don't have to like whore myself out to the next door-to-door company to go knock on doors and sell things for other people. I can create my own stuff that my audience is already interested in, get on phone calls with them and sell them. And I can do that from like my living room. What a crazy thing that exists. So making that first dollar, it was, I remember it very clearly because it was this guy, Mark, and he had listened to my show because he found me on somebody else's show that I was a guest on, started listening to my show and just loved the content that he was listening to. And at the time I was offering free one-on-one phone calls for anybody in my audience that was willing to talk to me. I wanted to see that there's people on the other end. So I made it super clear. And I was like, anybody that wants to jump on a quick 30-minute call with me, go to this page. I actually think it was inside of my Facebook group. So I made them join my Facebook group. And then there's my Calendly link in the welcome post to my Facebook group. And I was like, go there, set up a one-on-one call. I'd love to talk to you. And my only goal in doing that was just to get to know the people that were actually listening to my show better, ask them why they were listening to it, how they found it, and then what are some other things that I could potentially help with. And so that last question was the thing that I started, using to collect data to be like, okay, well, people are interested in this. They're interested in this. They're interested in this. And so I kind of like teased to this guy that I was going to be doing a course on networking or something like that. And he was like, oh, how much are you going to make it for? And it was like, I don't know, like $200 or something, $197 or something. And then he was like, check your PayPal. So I go to my PayPal and open it up, and he sent me $200 without even I didn't try to sell it. I wasn't trying to tell him to do anything. I was just a get to know you phone call, but he liked my stuff enough to send me $200 before I even created the course, just to be like, hey, make it. And the money, like I already sent you the money, so go make it now because I want it. You know what I mean? And then it ended up turning into the mastermind. So I remember I jumped on another call with them and I was like, hey, I'm going to give you a full refund because, we're not doing the course anymore. It's actually going to be a mastermind. The mastermind's not $200. It's going to be $1,000 for 3 months. I think it was $1,000, 3 months. And then, and so I was fully prepared and thinking that I was going to be giving this guy a full refund, but instead I opened up my PayPal and he sent me the remaining $797 or whatever it was to be a part of the mastermind. And I was like, okay, this is cool. You know what I mean? And so then I went out and got 5 other people to join it, and I convinced them all to jump in. And like I said, I think I broke even on the mastermind because I bought them all tickets to 10X GrowthCon that year as like a part of the mastermind. So we would all have an excuse to meet up in person. And those tickets were like $800. So, I didn't really make anything, but it was just it was such a huge like vote of confidence in myself just to be like, oh, you can make money online. Oh, this podcasting thing does work in terms of building relationships with customers, because I didn't have to sell most of these people. They already listened to my show. They already felt like they liked me. They trusted me, and I had information that they wanted from me, that had connections they wanted, and they gave me the money. And this is like me coming from door-to-door sales where I'm knocking on a door. They have no idea who I am. I'm selling a product they don't even know that they want. And I'm leaving with a contract in an hour from their living room. You know what I'm saying? Like it was so polar opposite than what I was used to. And I was like, it clicked.
It was pretty seamless as opposed to, overcoming all the objections and showing all the value of your product that you probably had to do with door to door. And I think there's a very important lesson in what you just said for all creators. A lot of creators, especially first time creators or people who are maybe working a 9-to-5 and want to step out into this creator world, they think they're going to rely on the YouTube ad revenue or the TikTok creator fund or whatever other options there are out there for creators to get paid from the platform. And that's just not the best way to make money. Not only is it pennies relative to the opportunity. If you want to be serious about it, you want to monetize, the best way I think to do so is go out there and create a product, because your listeners want more from you. Your core audience wants more from you. Now, one thing I heard from you, Travis, is that you said something along the lines of when you were getting started, your goal was to interview people who people wanted to listen to. And if you did this enough times, eventually people would want to listen to you. So that is where you found the value of networking. Obviously, you've taken networking to the umpteenth level by creating a podcast centered around networking, building relationships. And with the rebrand of your podcast, you examined what networking really meant and that's making friends. And that has become the theme and the name of your podcast now with Travis Makes Friends. So maybe if you could just kind of tell us maybe a story or share why networking is so valuable and so important to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, sure, man. And real quick, just to touch on that last topic one more time, I don't want people to get discouraged from thinking about sponsorship revenue and things like that when they're creating something. That to me is like the ultimate goal. It's the long run goal. It's like the 10-year goal, maybe 5-year goal. And for some people, you could do it less than that. But it is still the holy grail of creator revenue to me because it's completely free. It's expense free. You don't have like, I was going to say, I don't think he would mind me sharing this, but he literally publishes all of his income reports. But if you go to John Lee Dumas's website, he still tells you how much money he makes every month and what exactly it's from. The dude still makes like $120,000 a month on just sponsorships, which is pure cash flow. There's zero expenses related to that. There's no employees you have to hire for that. It's just, it's to me like still like the holy grail of podcast or YouTube revenue is AdSense and sponsorship revenue. It's just that the timeline that it takes for most creators to get from zero to where they're actually earning revenue in any regard is way longer than they think it's going to be. So I'm a huge fan of like exactly what you said. Start with a teeny tiny audience, build true fans one at a time, create a product that serves a need, hopefully a more expensive product rather than a cheaper product, right? I'm not talking about a $20 hat here. Create a product that solves a need for them, make real money, and then invest that real money, a percentage of profit or all of profit, depending on if you need that income to survive and pay your bills. Take that and dump it directly back into those advertising channels that we were talking about before, and then watch your audience grow over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And then when that happens, once you get up to some respectable numbers, you can start bringing in sponsorship revenue, and that money is free and easy. And you get cool stuff sent to you by fun brands and stuff like that. So I don't want to discourage people from that, but I do want to set proper expectations. It's going to take longer than you think it's going to take. And in the meantime, you should absolutely be creating some sort of product or service that you can make money off of so you can have control of your life and be able to put money, extra money into those advertising channels. Anyway, that's an aside. Your question about why is networking important for entrepreneurs. So networking became really important for me personally because when I was leaving that world I grew up in, I was starting from scratch in terms of my relationships. Like I was very well, I guess, connected inside of that world. I grew up at that campus. People knew who I was. I had a good reputation there. I played sports. I did music. I did photography. I did, all these different things. And so like I had a pretty good reputation inside of that ecosystem. And when I left, it was really scary because when I left that world, when you leave a, religious kind of bubble or context like that, nobody follows you. Everybody stops caring about what you do in life. And so when I was starting the show, it was like I was starting from scratch, man. It wasn't like it was a personal mission of mine. It wasn't just a topic I wanted to talk about. I didn't know a single. I'd never met a millionaire, let alone like had a friend that was one. You know what I mean? So I was just blown away that people were making this type of money, and I was so curious on how they were doing it, and it meant so much to me that they were able to take time and explain things to me, and so that mission became like really personal for me, and then I watched it prove itself over time, where it was like every time I wanted to do something new, I had a list of people that I could call that I had built relationships with and friendships with through this world. And they could give me advice. And these are people that were, if you just paid them for coaching, it's like, it's $100,000 a year or something like that to pay. Like, and I know that because I've asked some of them to like, hey, what would it look like to work formally with you? It's at least $100,000 a year. I'm like, okay, well, I'll take the free ones. Thank you. You know what I mean? But they were still all willing to jump on a call with me because they saw something in me. They believed something in me. We had an actual relationship, like a real friendship. And it saved me tons of hours. It saved me probably tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, just in the relationships that I've built. For me, the relationship thing is it's impossible to be happy, fulfilled, and successful without the relationships. You know what I'm saying? So I've asked that question, who you know or what you know, which one's more important? I've asked that to hundreds and hundreds of really successful people, and I've gotten answers all over the map. But the one that really holds true to me is still going to be who, for me personally, because the relationships in your life lead to higher levels of happiness and fulfillment over time. And this is like, there's a study that came out from Harvard recently, and it was the longest study of human of humans and happiness, I think is what it was. It was the longest study that was ever conducted when it comes to like what makes people happy, what makes people fulfilled and live a good life. And they had all these hypotheses at the beginning as to what would be that thing, right? More money or more status, or, you know, areas you live in, or the work that you did, or whatever is, you know, the type of work that you engaged in, and did you do what you're passionate about, and blah, blah, blah. And they had all these hypotheses on what it was going to be. And then they followed these people, and the study started like 1920s, 1930s. They followed these people all the way until recently. The study just came out. And the number one thing by a landslide that made people happier in life was relationships and connection to other people. And so it's like, can you do this stuff on your own? Yes, you can. Is it more difficult? I would argue that it is more difficult. I think that you're making the path more difficult by thinking that you can do it all by yourself. If there's people to collaborate with, if there's people who've walked the road ahead of you and they have 30 years of experience doing something, and you can learn something from them that shaves 5 years off your learning curve. Like, to me, it's like networking is like the ultimate time shortener. I call it the fast pass. It's like you're in those long lines at Disneyland. You want to get to the front, you got to have a fast pass, and you walk to the front of the line. You know, you still have to walk. You still got to do the work. You don't just teleport to the front of the line. You still got to do the work. You still got to walk, but you're walking by all the people who are trying to figure it out themselves, because you got somebody at the front of the line that's like, hey, come up here. I'll show you the way, you know? So I think it cuts a ton of time off your learning curve. And at the end of the day, I think you're going to be a more happy, fulfilled, fun human being through making sure that you're intentionally and purposefully focused on building quality connections with quality people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, making connections, going to events, networking, you know, that's where I met great people. You know, this is how I met Brian too, you know, just by going to these events and making those connections, you know. And I'm really impressed by like the people that you have interviewed as well, like celebrities, for example, like Shaquille O'Neal, Rob Dyrdek, you know, Grant Cardone, you know, like how do you prepare for those big interviews?
So interestingly enough, for the Shaq interview, I didn't really have much time to prepare. It was like the way that I ended up getting that was through a buddy who has a charity foundation and stuff, and we'd done some work together. And then I kind of like got this. It was like I won this, like, I guess, raffle or whatever, or auction, and it came with a FaceTime call with Shaq. It was supposed to be like a 3-minute FaceTime call or something. And we were trying to schedule it for weeks. And then all of a sudden I had mentioned a time, and then like they got back to me like 2 hours before the time. They were like, hey, we're good to go for today at such and such time. And so I didn't get that email because I was in a meeting until like 15 minutes before. So I was scurrying upstairs. I was like, you know, frantic, trying to sitting down in front of the computer. And I didn't know it was going to turn into a podcast interview until I got on the thing, because it ended up being on Zoom. And then I told him at the very beginning, I was like, hey man, look, I'm such a big fan. You know, and when I was a kid, Shaq was like my childhood hero. Like I had bobbleheads and jerseys and paintings and like everything. I was a big Shaq and Lakers fan. I played a ton of basketball. Like he was my childhood hero. And so I was kind of at the very beginning just being like, hey, I mean, when I first started my podcast, I wrote down a list of names of people who I wanted to be on. Yours was the first one that I wrote down. I was like, and I know this isn't a podcast interview, but, you know, second best, and I'll take it. And he was like, well, hey, you have my permission to record this, and we'll go for 15 minutes if you want to turn it into a podcast. And I was like, okay. So yeah, that one I did not get a chance to prepare very well for, because it all happened so fast and then turned into an interview. But I think we still got some good stuff out of it. The other ones, bro, like I try to be very prepared for people who especially do this all the time, because that's the difference. You got to be a professional. You know, the good thing about podcasting is that anybody can do it. The bad thing about podcasting is that anybody can do it. So you have to put in the work of like being a broadcaster. Like think of what these real journalists and television hosts do for their work. You know, think of the teams of producers that they have on doing research and prep and helping out, coming up with questions and prep sheets and doing all this other stuff. And then podcasters just kind of turn on the mic and go like, I just like genuine conversations, so I don't like to prepare very much. It's like, no, you're just lazy. Like if you prepared, you would have an objectively better conversation. It's good to leave some curiosity in your mind. You don't need to learn every single thing about them, but if you prepare properly for really big names who do this kind of stuff all the time, then you're going to avoid those like awkward conversations that everybody has with them, or just the basics conversations that everybody has with them. So with Grant, like he loved the interview so much, and it's still on his YouTube channel to this day. So he published the whole interview on his channel. And if you go through the comment, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I'm saying it because to say that like preparation and research works, if you go through the comments on the video, there's a ton of people in there saying like, this is the best Grant Cardone interview I've ever watched. And it was not, again, not because I'm patting myself on the back. It's just because I took the time to do some freaking research and preparation. Like on the flight over there, I read his entire book. I had an entire list of questions that were things that were, they're like the third and fourth questions that most people ask. But if you listen to a bunch of other stuff that person's already done, you can start with the third or fourth questions. You don't have to start with the first. You don't have to be like, well, where'd you grow up? It's like, no, I know you grew up in, Louisiana, and you had this lake house and your dad made it to the middle class. Tell me about what that feeling was like when you felt when you guys lost that house. You know what I mean? Like that is a much better question than like, oh, where'd you grow up? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, because then to find out that he had a lake house is another question. And then to find out that his dad passed is another question. And then to find out that they had to move away is another question. You're just never able to get to the point of the conversation that gets the best gold out of it if you're starting where everybody else is starting. So yeah, the answer is is research and preparations. And specifically for me, if they do a lot of podcast interviews, I'm listening to as many podcast interviews as I can that they've done, because that'll tell me if you listen to like 6 of them, 5 of them are going to be almost the same conversation. So it tells you what to avoid talking about in order to get some new stuff out of the person, which will always make for a better conversation.
I like how you said get to the third or fourth question. I've never heard that before, but I think that can be extremely valuable to us, because what you did, whether it was intentionally or unintentionally, is you answered question 1 and question 2 in your lead up to question 3 or question 4. So that the audience still knows what's going on. Still, the table has been set, but now you're getting to the deeper stuff. So as we kind of come down here to the end of the interview, you've proven time and time again what networking can do for us. It can introduce you to people like Shaquille O'Neal. It can introduce you to people like Grant Cardone. And as a podcaster or show performer, the more people like that you get on your show, that's going to be leveraged to get more guests like that on your show. But for those people who are not maybe networking experts, you have created something really cool called Guestio. So maybe in the final few minutes of this podcast here, if you can tell us a little bit about Guestio and how people can use it to their advantage to grow their shows.
Yeah, we started Guestio as exactly that, like the cheat code to connect with people, because I know how much work goes into connecting with some of these people. So Guestio is like a Cameo, but for booking yourself podcast guests. So you can go there, click on somebody's name in the marketplace, and if you pay their fee, you can get them on your podcast. There's some steals in there, man. Like the James Lawrence, the Iron Cowboy, he ran 100 Ironmans 100 days in a row. So like an Ironman a day, 100 days in a row. He's on there for less than $1,000 for an interview. Like this guy gets paid tens of thousands of dollars to do keynote speeches all over the country. Matt Barnes, former NBA champion and top rated sports podcast host, is in there for like $500. Sean Merriman's a former Charger Pro Bowl athlete. He's in there. And there's a lot of really great people in there that you can go and just like pay a little bit of money to and have established a connection over a podcast interview, which is like the shortcut to the process. And the reason I built it is like, I was like, man, if this existed, I would use it. So let me just go ahead and build it and see what happens.
Yeah, that's really cool. You found a need and you filled a gap, and I hope the software or the platform, I guess I should say, does very well for you. Well, as far as I'm concerned, this has been a great interview, and it's always nice to have a pro on, Travis. So we really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the questions. Appreciate the research that was done ahead of time. You guys obviously knew your stuff and knew some things about my material and the stuff that I'm putting out there. So I appreciate both of you for having me on the show, taking the time, taking it seriously. It always makes for a better conversation, and I mean that.
Thank you so much, Travis. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, listener. We'll see everybody on the next episode of the Evolved Marketing Podcast. And make sure you go and check out Travis Makes Friends, available on all podcast platforms.